Does placing this red box in the middle of the blue box sound difficult? Well, today I will show you 5 ways to do just that, and at the end, we'll tell you which one I think is the best for 2023. A bit late for that, so maybe 2024 as well, but let's get started with a simple template we'll use across all 5 examples. First, we'll need to start with the base HTML. We can start with just a simple div for the container and then one more div as the content that we're looking to center. They will each have a class so that we can give them each the specific styling that we need. Next, let's just make this a proper web page by wrapping things in an HTML tag. Then we also need a body for the content of the page. And in the head tag, we just now need to link to our CSS file for the styling. Okay, let's now look at the base CSS. We need to target the 2 classes that we created, the container and the content. Now let's just give the container a blue border and the content a red border in order to be able to visually see what's happening. So far, this is what we have, just 2 divs hugging each other basically. But in order to better see what we're going for here, let's just give the container a width of 100% and a fixed height. The content, we just need to give it a fixed width. We're now back to where we started the video, so how do we get this red box to be in the middle? The first method I want to talk about is using table properties, which was a very common method back in the late 90s and early 2000s when browsers had very limited support for CSS, so developers had to get a bit creative with their solutions. To get this working, we need to set the display property on our container as a table, and then for our content, we need to make that a cell of the table. This cell will actually end up taking the entire space of the table just because it's only one cell. But next, we need to set the vertical align property to center the content vertically within the cell. And then on the last step, we just need to center the text with text align. You will notice that the outcome for this solution is quite different as the content ends up taking the entire space of the container. I would personally avoid using this method as it's neither flexible or responsive. This is mainly just to show how far we've come from a CSS standpoint. Another method is to use absolute positioning, and the idea here is that by doing some math, we can manually place our content at the middle point of the container. All we need to do is just give the container the position relative, and then for the content, it has to have the position absolute for us to have that flexibility to position it wherever we want. Now we just need to place it 50% from the top and 50% from the left, and you might think we're done just yet, but it's not quite there. That's because we placed the top left corner of the content at the middle point of the container. But actually what we want is the middle point of the content to match the middle point of the container instead. In order to do that, we just need to shift the content halfway to the left and halfway up to be in the middle using the transform property. Would I use this centering method to build an entire website? Definitely not, but where I think this can be useful is just placing things like a modal in the middle of the website. Now for the third method, this is probably the simplest method on the list, and just like absolute positioning, it should not be your go-to method for the entire layout of the website. Where this method shines is when you need simplicity to just center something that has a specified width. By setting margin auto, now our content gets shifted to the center, and what happens behind the scenes is that it takes all the empty space horizontally and just splits it evenly between the left and the right sides. The good thing about this method is that it can be combined with other methods like absolute positioning or one other method that we'll touch on a bit later. Remember the first method we talked about, table properties, and how it was using a table? Although I'm simplifying it a lot, I like to think of this next method as table properties on steroids. I'm talking here about CSS Grid, and as the name implies, it's amazing at creating a grid layout while also maintaining flexibility, responsiveness, performance, basically everything you want from your website, and everything that a simple table was just lacking. To easily get started and achieve our goal using CSS Grid, all we have to do is just set the display to grid and specify place items to center, and it's that easy. It can get a lot more complicated than this, but for what we need, this is all we need. But why is it not a number 1? Well, to keep it short, for me, it's mainly because it has a slightly higher learning curve, and it can get a bit more complex where I believe most people just wouldn't see the benefit of it. Before we go into the last thing on the list, if you would like to read about these things in a bit more detail, check out the Medium article I wrote down below in the description. And also, make sure to subscribe and just let me know what other topics you'd like to see videos on. Last but not least, Flexbox. Flexbox is actually the opposite of CSS Grid in that it's a lot easier to pick up. Also, whenever I get a little rusty on the front end, I always come back to this cheat sheet to just refresh my memory, and if you're interested, I'll leave the link in the description. To get started with Flexbox, on the container, we just need to set the display to flex, justify the content to center, and lastly, align the items to the center. That's all. This method would be my go-to in 2023 and most likely 2024 as well. It's been the gold standard and for a good reason. It's easy to use, development is quick, and it works in most scenarios. So just start getting used to it and you will see how even before you start coding from the planning phase, you actually start thinking in a Flexbox way. When it comes to Flexbox versus CSS Grid and which one you should pick, I actually plan on making a more extensive video on this topic, but the answer is it depends. It all depends on your requirements, the type of layout, your actual existing knowledge, and much more. The good news though is that whatever you pick, you're not stuck with it forever. You can actually implement both in the same project and have them working together. But hopefully after watching all this, you find it a bit easier to get that red box in the middle of the blue box.